Hi, I'm Tom Marshburn. I'm the pilot of NASA's SpaceX Crew 3 mission. Watch me launch with my crew to the International Space Station on NASA TV. I'm Tom Marshburn. I'm the pilot for NASA's SpaceX Crew 3 mission to the International Space Station. So I was born in Statesville, North Carolina, little town in the Piedmont area in the woods there with my 6 brothers and sisters. We shared a bed. We shared our bath. It was always a crowded place, but it was full of love and joy, great childhood memories. But we loved to go outside. We'd go to our grandparents' farm and spend the entire time outside, spend sometimes late into the night in the woods just exploring around. I think that was where I got my first a joy of exploration and overcoming fear of the unknown a little bit and getting very excited about it. But at first I wanted to be an artist, and then I read a book about space, about Apollo 13, and that made me fall deeply in love with problem solving, the engineers that solved the problems on that mission, and space flight itself. It became a passion. I started reading every book I could about space flight while I was in elementary school, and that led me on the track to enjoying physics. I wanted to build spaceships. I wanted to be involved in space flight any way I could, starting from like the age of 13. So I liked physics, I think, because it was the science that I thought really got at the root of the way things work. And that's probably it. It seemed to me to be the thing most applicable to understanding space and planets and stars, how rockets move, and why they work the way they do, what an orbit is, that sort of thing. And once I knew that, the whole became less mysterious but that much more exciting. Not quite sure why spaceflight grabbed me the way it did. It found me, really, more than me deciding to become fascinated with it. There's something about leaving everything we know behind, everything, not just our friends or family or home, but even the planet, going to places that we knew almost nothing about at the time I was reading about it. And understanding how somebody could change, their own personality could change, and when they came back. So it was almost like going up into heaven or something and coming back and seeing how somebody could change. And that was just infinitely fascinating to me. So after high school, I went to Davidson College, a little school, again in North Carolina. I was a physics major there and ran straight into the wall of the rigor of really studying physics for the first time. So a huge challenge for me. Again, very fascinated with it. Probably the biggest academic challenge that I've ever had in my life was taking physics in college and in grad school. But I had a lot of friends there because the college was in the mountains, continued to do a lot of backpacking and joined the swimming team. So had a lot of break from the academic rigor as well, and that was pretty important. That helped round me out a lot. So I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. 5 of them were doctors, had decided to become doctors. My parents were not doctors. So the one thing I knew I was never going to be was a doctor, because I didn't want to be just like them. But while I was in graduate school in engineering physics, I realized that everybody I was hanging out with, everybody I enjoyed being with, were either medical students or doctors. I also found out that I wanted to get out of the laboratory, out of the engineering laboratory, and meet and talk with people. And I thought, well, I feel like I'm good at interacting with people, and I think I'm technically able to do it, maybe medicine's something for me. And as it turned out, I had a choice of either going for an MD or a PhD. I said, I'm going to go for the MD. And it turned out I loved it. Got so immersed with it, into it, that I actually forgot about space for a few years. I think the transition to medicine was actually fairly easy for me. For me, doing the problem sets that come in school working all those, the math, physics, engineering problems would take an enormous amount of time, whereas at first, at least, medicine is largely memorization. And so I found that to be easier, of course, in medicine. Then you get into the analysis as you get to know how to take care of patients and understand what their symptoms are and figure out what's wrong with them. So that became immensely challenging after a while. But I found the transition academically, at least, to be pretty easy. So I left Davidson, went to University of Virginia for a master's in engineering, and then went to Wake Forest University Medical School. And began to practice after that in Toledo, Ohio, where they had a life flight program, and that's where I did my residency for emergency medicine. I wanted to fly. I was beginning to fall in love with flying small airplanes. So this was an opportunity to mix the two. I never flew helicopters, but I got to ride in them under all kinds of weather conditions and under some pretty scary circumstances as a life flight doctor. And so that's why I wanted to go to the Midwest to train in emergency medicine. So learning medicine, practicing medicine certainly is all engrossing, all encompassing, and it needs to be to learn how to take care of patients. And so I kind of didn't have time to think about, kind of forgot the whole spaceflight thing. In the back of my mind, I was going, maybe someday I can get back to it and work for a company someday, who knows. I was practicing in Seattle in emergency medicine when I got a letter from a residency director that I'd worked with in my residency. It said, there is a new program to train doctors out in the field to come into NASA and learn how to be flight surgeons. It's the first year of the program. Maybe you'd like to apply. Now, apparently I had talked about spaceflight and didn't even realize it because they all knew that I was interested in this. But I became very excited and said, hey, maybe this is a chance to check out getting back into space-related stuff, especially in medicine. And so I applied for the first class of what was then the Space Medicine Fellowship, and myself and another physician were selected. And in '93, we showed up at NASA. I was all starry-eyed, excited, and ready to start learning about space medicine. So when I first got to NASA, I was in this fellowship, so I was studying, I was learning a lot. But I helped a little bit with designing some of the space shuttle medical kits. I got to know about what the space medical problems were and did some deep dives into that. But importantly, I got to know the patients. I got to know the astronauts and the pilots that I would be working with later. And that was an enormous amount of fun. There's something about working at Johnson Space Center, I think, that if anybody had ever considered flying in space or wanting to, when you show up and you see the incredible things that everybody is doing, it's hard not to get the bug to want to apply and become an astronaut. Didn't think the chances were very good, but there I was. And soon after I arrived in my training program, there was an application season open, so I applied. And I did not get asked for any interviews or anything like that. It stopped. One of my first jobs then as a flight surgeon was to get shipped out to Russia to support the Phase 1 program, which is when we took NASA astronauts, put them on the Mir space station so that we could NASA and America could learn about long-duration spaceflight before we started sending astronauts to the International Space Station. And it was during that time, getting to know the astronauts that I was out there, secluded with, out in Star City in Russia. They're saying, Tom, you ought to apply again. So I did. I applied again, and I didn't get in. That time, though, they had asked for my references, but that was as far as I got. Applied a third time, didn't get in. And I did get as far as an interview, however, and that was very exciting. So I'd passed the physical and got through the interview, and I thought, well, that was a very fun adventure. I thanked everybody for letting me join in there. I guess it's just not going to happen. Had a chance for one more interview, though, one more selection process, and that was when I got in. Yeah, there was certainly there's no downside to applying. Certainly the only guarantee is that if you don't apply, you're not going to get in. If you want to be an astronaut. But for me, on that last time applying, I think I was most relaxed. I was the most knowledgeable. I practically knew the people on the board. I was very happy where I was professionally, and I think that maybe made a difference, that I was just relaxed and confident coming into that last selection process. Certainly incredibly exciting to get that one phone call from the person that you know is going to call if you got in. I was stunned, had a hard time talking when I got that phone call. The cool thing about becoming an astronaut, first of all, is you meet your classmates. So there were 13 of us, just 10 at the time, but then we had 10 more than me, and then had 3 more come on board from the Japanese space program. But everybody's about to have the adventure of their lives, some of the greatest challenges we've ever faced, but we're all going to do it together. So you get to know them a little bit, and then the first official training event was they put us in our flight suits, much like this, helmet, gloves, boots, and we all jumped into the swimming pool, learned how to swim fully clothed, because you need to do water survival in order to fly T-38s, which is necessary in order to train to be an astronaut. So that's where we all started. We all got to know each other quite well. We went off to Pensacola for flight training there, came back, and then we're all in classrooms, we're in simulators, a bit like graduate school, but the pace was much faster. So it was all a very exciting time. So that was, the first flight occurred about 5 years after we'd been selected. You've been waiting a long time. I, of course, had been waiting about 30 years for this moment. It's a combination of some of the greatest excitement you've ever had in your life. Maybe there's a favorite holiday that you've had, and the night before, as a child, you're about to explode. You're so excited. But it's also the night before one of the biggest exams you've ever had. So that combination of not wanting to mess up, but at the same time, you can't believe it's about to happen. What's unique about launch day is all those things that have never happened in simulators. Number one, there's no one else there other than the closeout crew. It's a big old explosive rocket just sitting on the pad, so it's very silent, very quiet, except for the rocket itself. The shuttle is making noise, it's groaning, and there's chunks of condensate falling off the sides of it. It looks like a building that's alive and feels like it. A little bit scary, but the excitement so greatly overwhelms that any kind of fear or anything, you just kind of push it right back in the back of your mind. The launch itself, we had several scrubs before we launched. We didn't think we were going to launch on the day that we did because of weather, but then the last second they said we're go for launch. So everybody suddenly had been lying for 2 hours on our backs. Everybody suddenly went, wow, this is actually going to happen. I had a big smile on my face. And you could hear the main engines of the shuttle start to roar. I remember it being like a lion's roar, this dry grumbling roar that came from behind us, but it was persistent, just kept going and going and going. And then when the solid rocket boosters lit and the bolts fired, and there's a big kick in your back as you get pushed down into your seat. And there's a lot of rumbling and rattling. The space shuttle was quite pliable. And you could feel all the vibrations and all the degrees of freedom going up, and very loud, including the structure around me. I was in the mid-deck rattling, as well as the roar and the wind that's going by. The shouts of my crewmates through the intercom as we yahoo, and we went through a roll program as we flipped over on our backs. Then when the solid rocket boosters fall off, it's just smooth from there on. The G's build up to about 4 G's. You start to breathe in sips as you start to fatigue under the G stress after about 8 minutes of that. And then it stops. And there's silence except for a cabin fan. And my pen started to float in front of me when we had reached orbit. So 127 was an incredibly aggressive mission. We had 5 spacewalks we had to do. We had a 16-day flight with 11 days docked to the space station, and I think 15 of those 16 days were robotic operations. So the robotics were going on all the time while we were doing spacewalks. We had an enormous amount of equipment to put on the outside of the space station and to transfer through the hatch to the inside as well. So it was like a big hurricane that had arrived at the space station. We were also the first time we had 13 crew members on board. I think we're still at the Guinness Book of World Records as the most number of people in one spacecraft at one time. But those were the main objectives. We had some science objectives as well, but ours was a construction and resupply mission largely. So I did 3 spacewalks on that mission and supported a 4th as the inside crew member. I went out the hatch with Dave Wolf. I was his 2nd out of 3 rookies that he had to take out the hatch and show us our first steps on our first spacewalk. The main goal for us was to take these batteries, each weighing about 200, 250 pounds, and move them from the robotic arm that was holding them from the space shuttle and move them onto the space station. This had not been done before. The batteries couldn't be located right next to the truss of the space station, so it was a matter of climbing out to grab the battery and then climbing back to hand it over to your spacewalking partner. So they're very thrilling, but a lot of moments, I've been a rock climber before, and a lot of moments where I was glad I had that experience, because you just got to take a deep breath and make the move and not think about it too much for some of that spacewalk. We spend so much time training, which is really good, on the ground, learning every handrail, every bolt, but what they can't train for spacewalks is the view. They can't train the temperature changes. On the sunny side, it's very warm. On the dark side, it's very cold. Sometimes my hands would get numb, my feet would get numb, my teeth would start to chatter. So I learned how to control my suit temperature a little bit better. 100% oxygen, it's quite dry. And so all of that overhead is something that can't completely be trained on the ground, so it remains still and remained a very unique and exciting experience. There was certainly, I'd have to say the most spectacular was out on a spacewalk, a moment when I had an opportunity at the end of the truss, so all the way half a football field's length away from the airlock, when I could hold on to one handrail, move my body away from the space station, and look at the Earth, look at the universe, and not see any human structure such as the space station in my field of view, and to feel that I was free flying over the Earth. But the other moment that was very special was at the window with Julie Payette, who was the Canadian astronaut on our crew, and the two of us watching as we went over Canada. We had about 15 minutes to spare. Watching as we flew over Canada and went over a huge thunderstorm over the east coast of North America, and while she was able to point out all of her favorite sights around her country. Always, in my opinion, looking out the window with someone else is one of the most precious things we can do in space. I was really curious how the Soyuz would compare to the space shuttle. And the fact is, going from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour, physics-wise, in 8.5 minutes, this experience is going to be somewhat similar. But the Soyuz, I felt, didn't have the solid rocket boosters, so it's a little smoother. Not all the rattling in the lower atmosphere that the SRBs provide to the shuttle. And so it seemed to be a little more solid. Once you get out of the atmosphere, though, it's just smooth sailing. The Soyuz also has this fascinating staging where they fire an upper stage before they drop the lower stage. And what happens is the plume of fire that comes out of that upper stage gets shot up as well as down before they drop that lower stage. The shroud had come off. You could see the blackness of space. You could see sunlight coming in, and then suddenly a big bang and a jolt, and flame and fire went shooting ahead of us, and then as we accelerated past it, it went shot behind us. And that was a huge surprise. We had no idea that was going to happen, and it was just thrilling. The long-duration mission is quite a bit different from the shuttle mission. It's easy to go through a shuttle mission getting 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night, not allowing yourself the time to exercise. You're busy anyway with spacewalks, which are physically quite rigorous. On the long-duration space flight, the exercise is absolutely essential, and you have a couple of weeks to catch your breath, if you will. The other thing about long duration that's very nice is it's about 4 to 6 weeks of living in zero-G on orbit when you realize, oh, my body now has really adapted. It never really adapted in that short duration flight that I did with the shuttle. So you really feel like you've become a resident of space, a resident of zero-G. And you start to feel like you're getting an idea of how this works. Every day is really a series of a long series of problem solving. You got to figure out where to put your pencil, where to put your drink if you have it, how to set up your laptop. That's all before you even get started. So maybe 10,000 times a day, you're solving little problems like this. And when that becomes fluid, then you really feel like you can be efficient and get a lot of work done. And there's a lot of work to get done on the space station right now. The other is the interaction with the ground on the science. Science was not as much a part of the shuttle flight because it had so many operational things we had to get done. On the long duration flight, you are constantly changing from being a plumber to a electrician, and then most of the time going back to your laboratory and spending 8 to 14 hours a day getting ready for and performing experiments. So hugely engaging, and it just became an enormous amount of fun over time. So for the long duration flight, again, it's the experience with your fellow humans. I think that are some of the most memorable. I had a moment with each of my crewmates, Kevin Ford, Chris Hadfield, Chris Cassidy, at the cupola, that beautiful dome-shaped window, one of the best views in space. When just the two of us were looking out over some phenomenon or some place over the Earth. And those are the things, their insight and the perspective it gave me, or the shared experience of seeing, for instance, with Chris Hadfield, this electric storm over the northern Pacific with bolts of lightning that looked like the size of my arm. Just huge events going on the Earth. We were so astounded and just shouting, couldn't believe it. We didn't even think about getting out a camera. And so, but I really wish I had captured that in a video or something. But the experiences with your friends is what seemed to be the most memorable and most precious. So the astronaut office likes to make use of your experience in space, obviously. You spend about 6 months with debriefs and rehab. And then after that, they get you right back into the flow of helping other astronauts train. If you had to describe the job of being an astronaut most accurately, you would say that we are here to support human spaceflight. And every once in a while, we get to fly in space. So now was my time to support human spaceflight. I was a branch manager for several branches within the astronaut office. So what's kind of unique for me is that I was pulled out of the astronaut office and spent a year helping start a new division. So I was helping manage about 135 engineers and a few astronauts for a whole new area of spaceflight support. That was an incredibly good learning experience, quite humbling actually to see how much work goes into getting us ready to fly. So after that, I came back as our branch chief. I was asked then by the chief of the office, who's an astronaut. He said, "Tom, we want you to back up a mission, a Soyuz mission, and we want you to back up Luca Parmitano when he's getting ready to launch. And you don't have a prime assignment." I said, "All right, well, that's what you need, then that's what I'll do." And he said, "I wanted to be clear, you do not have a prime assignment. You're just backing up." I said, "All right. No, that's what I want to do." So I spent about 2 years backing up both him and Jessica Meir, going through the left seat Soyuz training. Again, one of the most rigorous, tough academic experiences of my life. Spent a lot of time in Russia, about 22 trips back and forth between the U.S. and Russia over a year and a half. And ended up watching Jessica launch, came back into the astronaut office, and I was back supporting other folks, supporting the mission and some plans for going to the moon. But at that time, I was then offered the slot to be a member of this crew, Crew 3 Dragon. The training is excellent, getting ready for a Dragon flight. Certainly some of the techniques for learning how to fly a spacecraft, some of the problems associated with it, the guidance, the navigation, the control, those were not new concepts to me by any means by that point, having worked on the Soyuz for a couple of years. But every vehicle is different. Every approach is different, especially with the commercial vehicle where they have taken a totally different approach to humans flying in space, which is all very innovative, very exciting, and somewhat of a challenge to learn as well. But just like you usually do, I, in spaceflight, got into the academics and very quickly went into the simulations, watching the Crew 2 as they were training for a little while, but Raja and I immediately jumped into the seats. He has an immense amount of experience as a squadron commander in the Air Force, So he was able to show me and kind of lead me through. He was very familiar with the Dragon at that time. And so we developed, most of the work was developing our technique for how we're going to work together, what he needs, what I can do to help support him as commander of the Dragon. So I was a private pilot before I became an astronaut. Of course, we fly T-38s as part of our training. One of the most important things about that, one of the reasons why we fly jets in the air to get ready for flying spacecraft in space, is one of the mindsets that's very important is to always stay ahead of the airplane. You always want to be aware of what's going to happen and be prepared for what's about to happen so that you're not surprised. If you are looking for something to do and you're not sure what to do, you're already behind. And so that mental training is so essential for space flight, and you get that from aviation. The other is being able to act. By that I mean actually operating a machine while you're under a lot of heat stress and vibration and G-stress, and you've got voices in your head and you're trying to talk and communicate and navigate all at the same time. Those are skills, especially the communication is a really important skill that can take years to learn. And so that's why aviation is so important. So I'll be the pilot of the Crew Dragon. I see it as fill in the gaps that the commander doesn't have time to look at. For instance, if we experience a malfunction, he'll be looking at keeping the crew safe, looking at the next action. What does this mean for the mission? And I might have a chance to dig in on my side of the displays as to what actually happened, what component of it was that went wrong, if anything. This is all in simulations, of course. And then we do have distinct roles. At some point, he has to get out of the seat to get something done, in which case then I'm monitoring the displays and vice versa. So it's a kind of a intricate tag team a lot of times between the two of us. Yeah, you know, it's exciting to fly on a new spaceship for sure, and a new design of a spaceship. But I'm looking forward more to flying with three people that haven't flown in space before. This is a very unique crew. They are incredibly operationally savvy already, both, I imagine, from their prior jobs at ESA and in the military. So I know they can do the job. There's no question about that. So what I try to do is, if there's any gaps in their knowledge of how they're going to feel, how they're going to operate, what is the zero gravity going to be like, how that might challenge our expectations for what we can get done, I'm sort of there to say, when in a simulation, say, you know, at this point, myself or some of us might not feel very good because we just got to space. And I'm trying to anticipate those things, help take care of the crew, understand what my limitations are so they can help me. And I think that's probably managing expectations of what we can do and making sure I have the solution for if there's any physical issues once we get into space. Working with a private company is fascinating. I'm very impressed by what they've taken from NASA and space flight, because there's been a close relationship between the two. All the good they've taken from that, and then innovated with some of their own ideas and their own approaches. For instance, we do some of the academics. They listen to what the crew says, and they try to change it if they feel it's appropriate, so that we can fly most comfortably in what we think is a good way to operate. But they are also incredibly dedicated to schedule, which is a good thing because we do have to fly eventually, to making it very safe and to understanding how that vehicle works, taking care of their vehicle and accomplishing the mission. So for all of us, safety is number one, but accomplishing the mission, taking care of the assets we have is number two. And I'm just very impressed by how dedicated they are and how hard they work to make sure that this mission is successful, and to include incorporating some of our ideas and our approaches. So Grinder was a squadron commander. He was given an enormous amount of responsibility when he was in the Air Force. You can see it when he's work. He's always taking care of everybody in terms of schedules and getting things done. He's super fast at getting that done. His ability to analyze something is very quick. So when he's on the displays and we're working through a stage of flight or working through a malfunction that happened, he gets to an answer very quickly. He's also very good, and he and I have tried to establish a culture of making everybody feel comfortable to say, hey, I made a mistake on this, but that's okay, and we're going to work through it, because everybody is good at something, but nobody is good at everything. And so making sure we're all comfortable with filling each other's gaps. And Grinders naturally falls into that role as well. Kayla brings to the table, first of all, she's in a seat next to Grinder. So she's not in control of a display necessarily, not in control of part of the spacecraft, but she can see what's going on, and she can monitor with procedures that she has in her lap. And she is incredibly good at saying, I don't understand this part of this procedure, therefore maybe no one else totally understands it either. And we have all, including the training team, gotten to understand that vehicle better by some of the questions she's asked and some of the solutions she's come up with. And she is really good at saying, let's stop what we're doing and think about what we're doing so we make sure we're doing the right thing. She was a lieutenant commander inside of a submarine, and you can see that come out. So she and Grinder both have great leadership skills already coming into the mission. So Matthias is going to be sitting on my right side. He does not have quite the view of the displays, but he is always thinking, always monitoring. When Matthias talks, we all listen, because he's got an idea or an observation that is essential for improving the flight or making sure the flight stays safe. So, and he brings with him a lot of operational experience as working as a Capcom and as a manager within ESA, and as a material scientist. He's very focused on the science that we'll be doing as well. As we get ready for a space flight, my family's pretty good at it now. It helps that they support the flight, that they're excited about it. And so in order to ensure that it remains exciting, I want them to get to know the crew. I want them to get to know the NASA system and people there. If there's anyone that they want to meet, I want to make sure it happens. If there's any opportunity to come out to train with me, I want to make sure that happens too. I want them to be as engaged in the mission as much as they possibly can, to include traveling out to some of our training sites around the world. Makes it fun and adventurous for them. When I'm separated, which is quite a bit, contact every day. Even if we're tired and had a long training day, I got to get a workout in, the contact is essential. Just to get into the habit, but also to trade those few words or those few images, so that when I come back, I'm not spending a lot of time trying to catch up. My mindset is already ready to jump in with the family and with the flow of things as soon as I get back. And that's true. That's how we're going to do our space flight as well. Stay in close contact, even if it's just a couple of words, as many days as possible, every day if possible. We'll have some video connections, but also to keep my family involved with the ground team, make sure they're getting all the communication they need. One of the great legacies of the space station is not just going to be the science, both the small innovations that of which there are tens of thousands, but also the big science questions that'll start to be answered. But very importantly, the international cooperation. This is one of the first, certainly today's perhaps most prominent, international cooperation for exploration. It's not for survival, it's not for competition in the marketplace, it is for just exploration. That is a wonderful opportunity. It's a very unique one. All around the world, those who train us, those who have built other parts of the space station and have contributed, are immensely proud of what they've done for good reason, love what they do, and love their contribution as well. It's up to us to take very good care of it. When I was on the space station last time, people asked, were you lonely? I said, no, you're alone, but you're not lonely because you have 4 communication channels all around the world. You're talking to a scientist or an engineer from any one of 4 Capcom sites around the world, and the whole space station was abuzz with different languages, Russian and English, and talking to people with different accents, and it's just a vibrant, wonderful place where great science is happening.